Hello, good afternoon. My name is Rachel Drake. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications here at Launch Fishers, and I want to welcome you guys to our final installment of our Podcast 101 or Podcast 104, since it's our fourth installment with Share Your Genius. So if you haven't attended any other sessions before, it's perfectly fine. Each of the sessions are standalone, and today we're going to talk about attracting your audience, amplifying your voice, accessing the people who are going to tune into the content that you're creating. And we've got Rachel Downey here, who is an absolute expert and a good friend, and happy to turn the stage over to you, Rachel.
Thanks all. I obviously have an agenda because I put a deck together, but I'm more curious to make sure this is time well spent for you. So is there anything that stood out to what made you say yes to coming today that would really help me help you make this time well spent? Care to share, anyone? If not, I'm driving forward, but I'm giving space. Okay, how many of you have a podcast? Nobody here has a podcast? Great, not yet. So how many of you are thinking about starting a podcast? One, two, several. Okay, cool. So that's great. So I'm gonna walk you through just some methodology and framework to help you go from I'm gonna start a podcast to actually pulling the trigger and doing it. And then we'll spend some time on understanding best practices of making sure you're getting the maximum impact out of that podcast, and hopefully do the thing that you want it to do, which is attract an audience. And what that audience does with you is ultimately up to you based on why you're saying yes to creating a show. So that's what we'll get into today. I will talk a whole bunch, but you are allowed to interrupt me. So if you have questions or I say something and you're like, I have no idea what she just said, but it sounded like something that I should understand, please interrupt me. That would help me be great for you. Cool? Awesome. All right. Okay. So for us at Share Your Genius, our primary tagline is it's never just a podcast. And so I'm going to show you why it's never just a podcast, so that when you say yes to whatever investment you're going to make into this medium, you're going to say yes and get the most out of it. And that investment is obviously sometimes dollars, but a lot of it is your time. And so I like to make sure that time is well maximized. And so I'm going to help you do that today as you think about podcasting for you or your organization that you represent. The primary way that I think about, and this is kind of me recapping just to help make sure we all have shared language and understanding. But when we say yes to saying we're going to launch a podcast, to me it has to have business impact, or it's like another thing that you just get to do, right? And so over the way that I think about it is typically typically you can bucket that impact into one of three primary outcomes. And the three primary outcomes that I've distilled into are these. So it is build brand, drive demand, or grow an audience. And if you can choose which outcome you're looking to achieve first, the rest becomes a lot easier when you go to actually develop the content itself. And this is how I've defined it, but build brand is essentially we're going to be establishing our authority, we're building credibility, we're getting more people to know who we are and what we're all about and all of those types of things. It's a longer term play, and so your strategy has opportunity to be a longer term strategy. Drive demand hits a little bit different, because drive demand is I need pipeline now. I need this thing to accelerate conversations. I need to be part of my deal cycle. Maybe I need to leverage this for sales enablement. It just hits different. And then the third bucket that I typically ask a client to, or advise people to bucket into, would be grow an audience. Grow an audience is also another longer term outcome, but it's not typically one that I would recommend you start with. So I would highly recommend you choose whether this is a brand or demand play first, and then let your strategy waterfall from there. There are other outcomes you could attach this to. These are just the three primary that when I work with a client, at any given time, any company is probably trying to handle one of these three things as their primary objective. The other one that's not on the screen that I think is relevant is leveraging this as an opportunity for your recruiting and retention strategy with new talent. And so if you're at a situation where you're we need new talent, your show could be attached to that effort as well. You just don't have that one up there. So hopefully that is helpful framing, as if you're considering saying yes to a podcast, start with the outcome in mind, and then we'll let the strategy kind kind of unfold from there. Okay. Once you have established, and again, I'm kind of setting some foundation here, and then we'll get into the amplification. But when you're thinking about saying yes to a podcast, you've established your outcome, and now you need to get really clear on your point of view. What is this show? How is this show going to get what message out and why and to whom and all those good things? If you don't have this stuff figured out, attracting an audience becomes not the right question to ask, because you can't even figure out who your audience is if you don't know who you are. And so part of this is just taking the opportunity to be like, what's my take? And I have it on here, but like, what is it that I think that challenges industry, like standards or assumptions? Like, and this isn't my opinion, but let's just put it as an example. If you all if you follow anything related to podcasting, there's a huge conversation constantly about video versus audio. I could literally come on here and say, podcast is audio only forever. That could be my hot take as it relates to a challenging industry norm, and then I could tell you why I think it's that. I'm not saying that's my opinion, but I'm saying that's an example that you could point to help you kind of figure out what is a hot take. And hot take doesn't need to be combative. It just needs to feel different than what everyone else is saying. So I would get clear on some of those things. And by the way, I believe in progress over perfection. So start with your theory of victory and let it change over time. That's completely fine. So knowing your point of view, understanding your take. The other thing is your credibility. Your credibility does matter when it comes to creating a show and even understanding the experience that you have. So for example, if I'm a new employee starting at a new company and I am head of brand or head of content, and I'm working for a cybersecurity company, and the mandate is we should create a podcast, and then I'm going to host it, I have no credibility in the cybersecurity space. Why would anyone listen to me talk about that? I need to use that as part of my competitive advantage for actually having the show. So I might change the show to allow it to be a curiosity minefield for me. So I might say, I'm the host, but my job as a host is just to ask a lot of questions because I know nothing. That actually gives me more credibility as a host because it's not me being somebody that I'm not. And so taking the time to establish yourself of what is my experience that's relevant to who I'm trying to get in front of? What is the experience I have that is relevant to the point of view that my company or the brand that I'm representing needs to get out into the marketplace, or my own brand? You get the point there. And honestly, I don't know y'all's experience in this room, but I can imagine a handful of you can think about the season in life when everybody was writing a book. And that was the calling card. It's if this person wrote a book, you knew they were super, super credible just because they had author next to their name. Podcast host is sort of becoming very similar to that, which is not a bad thing, but it's just an opportunity for you to go, what is my credibility here that sets me apart from other people who might have shows or other people who are creating content around these topics? So just keep that in mind of why should we listen to you and why should we care? And then consistency. This is another key thing when it comes to creating a show, whether it's a drive demand effort, grow an audience effort, recruiting, retention, or this is building brand. Consistency trumps basically everything else, because consistency allows you to actually create connection. And when you create connection with your audience, connection with people, you actually build trust. And the only way you build trust is to be consistent and show up consistently over time. And so when you're going through this process of saying, I'm going to launch a podcast and I want the right people to listen to it, and I want to make sure people share it and all that good stuff that can come from it, you want to start with the outcome. Why am I doing this? So that you can honestly tell the right story back to your stakeholder, or if you're your own stakeholder, tell the story back to yourself of why I'm doing this, and then get really clear on your kind of point of view. And it can, like I said, it can evolve over time, but those are the two things that I would make sure I'm paying attention to while I'm saying yes to a podcast. Okay. What we just did there is you said, this is why I'm doing it from a business brand perspective. This is who I am as to why I'm credible to speak about it, what I'm committed to doing, my hot take. Now what I'm going to do is get really clear on my audience. And this is not necessarily the who, because that's a whole other topic. You knowing who your audience is literally, we could talk about that in a different way. I'm focusing very clearly on I'm assuming you all know your audience. That's what I'm doing here. So now, how do I make sure that I create a show that resonates with them? And so the way I think about that is, where are they now? So making sure that you understand how your audience consumes content today is critical to creating a show they actually want to listen, watch, pay attention to. Because it's never just a podcast, and podcasting is no longer synonymous with audio, you have to understand how they consume content. Is it shorts? Is it long form? Have they traditionally downloaded our white papers? Like all of those things as relevant data points for you to actually develop the creative around the show that you're going to create is understanding how they consume content today. And I would not ignore general consumer trends, just to be clear. Like how is the human race right now typically consuming content? That is a relevant data point. And then it's understanding, okay, well, I know that my primary audience is an executive level leader and they're streaming podcasts on YouTube. They're listening to them, but they're on YouTube. You should know that because you might think about your video differently than if I just said every podcast has to have a video for audio or a video for YouTube. So just taking the time to do that. And if you don't know, like ask them, like literally, like poll like 5 to 10 people that you know are your audience. How do you get your information? How do you get your content, et cetera? We have a client who, I think this is very cool. So they're a bank, and banks are not like the most exciting typically. But what they've done is they have a junior board of advisors. So they have a board of advisors that is literally juniors and seniors in high school. And they meet with them every single quarter, and because they're wanting that next generation to continue to open up bank accounts and things like that, and not use all the online options that they have today. So they're like, how do you guys consume content? How do you learn? They're like, well, we go on TikTok first, and then we go to YouTube. And so now the bank is going, how do we create content that is for TikTok that we can also leverage for YouTube? So just to kind of give you an idea of like asking people what they want as opposed to assuming what you think you know. I say, then over here we have like content clues. So instead of context, so content clues is essentially like you should be creeping on your audience. Like what are they actually talking about? What do they care about? What are they complaining about? Like what triggers them? Like those are the things that kind of just give you clues as to what is relevant to them. And then cataloging is the other piece, and cataloging is more of a YouTube term in terms of like understanding what topics are trending and what are the things that people are actually searching for. Those things help you pull together kind of a mind map of like what it is that my audience cares about, where are they currently engaging, and so that you have the opportunity to create that theory of victory around the show that you're going to create. And not only the show, but like what are the first few episodes that we're going to develop to make sure that we're bringing this to life. One of the things that I think a lot of people fall into when it comes to I want to start a podcast is because they don't do some of the upfront due diligence of these things, they think they have a show and they really have like a couple episodes. And so all of a sudden they're like, I'm not going beyond episode 5, or I don't know what else to talk about, or I'm bored as a host, I don't want to keep doing it. And it's like, well, it's because you didn't take the time to actually like, do the research and understand what people care about and all that kind of stuff. So this kind of hopefully level sets you into understanding, like start with outcome, get clear on your identity, like what are you bringing to the table? And then what is it that your audience is actually looking for? And then within that little Venn diagram, you kind of find the language that should be your show that you're developing. I'll pause for a second. Is there anything there that stood out or any questions there that you want, or anything you want me to lean into further, or is that all helpful? You should have defined who you think your audience is first. So if it's like, if you're thinking about doing a podcast, maybe. Just play. Yeah. So so if you were to do a podcast, let's just say that, would you be doing it because you want to as a personal human being that's interested in maybe doing a podcast, or would you be doing it as a representative of a company or a brand or? Okay. So if it's a personal interest, then you might pull that thread the way you talked about it first, where you're like, I have a personal interest in this thing. My audience probably has a personal interest in that thing. That's the assumption that you would be probably making. But if you're a brand who's launching a show, you typically know who you're wanting to get in front of in terms of like your buyer or your customer or whatever. And so that's what I'm saying. Like everything I'm talking about right now assumes you already know who your audience is. If you don't know who your audience is, you still would define the outcome you're looking to achieve. And you would still identify who you are, what matters to you, et cetera. And then I might just add a fourth little like circle here, and it would be like, go pressure test and find out who you think your audience is. And I would do that by who pays attention to me when I speak. Do I want that person to pay attention to me when I speak based on like what my offering is, that kind of thing. Sometimes it's okay with you being your own audience, like literally saying, I know I'm unique, but I'm not special, which means like there are other people out there who are probably interested in the same topics that I'm at and all that kind of stuff. And I'm going to assume my audience is like me. So I'm just going to describe myself. Yes. Yeah. Now, how do I make sure that people who are like me find me? That's kind of the theory of victory there. So is that helpful? Yeah. So there's two different things here. What Daniel's talking about is kind of like more in the cataloging category of like, what are people actually searching for? Where do I find out more about that person, what they're thinking about? And then there's over here going, I have content that doesn't exist right now and I need to attract people to it. You still have to play a little bit of the game to get found in terms of like discoverability and looking for the search terms that people are going to look for so that they also find you. Well, and I will actually get into some of that. But the first piece of this is literally like, know who you're trying to go after so that you can find out where they already are so that you can be found, to your point. Is that helpful, or did we create a new topic? Okay. No. So the way I think about it is like, you can sell generally, but you should be marketing specifically. And so like anybody can buy from you, sure, but you don't, if you spread yourself too wide, you actually can get lost in the sea of noise. All right. Any other questions? Okay, cool. All right. So this next piece that I want to just take a couple minutes on is I work really well personally when I have a system that I can organize myself to, because there are so many creative ideas, there's so many bright, shiny objects in the world of marketing that if I don't anchor myself, I'll just lose myself. And so I've developed this strategy, this formula that I constantly go through. Ashley knows this already, but I will quickly walk through this, and then we'll get into more of the like growth motions that you can pull when you're launching a show, because once you get it out there, you're like, this isn't Field of Dreams, you know what I mean? Just because you build it, people won't come. So like we need to make sure people are aware of it. So I will get to that just here in a second. So this is the way that I think about it. This is the formula that I have used time and time again, and it works every single time. It is people first, media driven, AI enabled. You cannot have a talk in 2025 if you don't mention AI, I've found. So we will talk about AI as it is helpful and relevant to this. But this is the formula. This is what I call the genius way, but you can call it your way. That's completely fine. And so the only way this way works is if you know why you're doing it and who you're doing it for, which is why I paused at the beginning to say those quick little pieces. So breaking this down for you, and this is illustrative, it is not prescriptive, meaning you might have one of these columns, not all three. You might have 7 columns. So it completely depends on the complexity of your organization, of your desire. If you're doing this as a personal brand, you get the idea. But first, we talked about why we're doing this. We're clear on that. We know what the company's primary objective is right now. And let's say the company's primary objective is just to build brand. That's great. We know that. We know who we are. So because we know who we are, we're able to lean in and understand our brand story. What is our story that we need the market to speak back to us about? It's great if you know it, but if I asked Ashley what we did, and she said, you guys do Panera catering, I'd be like, oh, awesome. She does not know our brand story. You see what I'm saying? So your brand story needs to be something that people can repeat back to you about you. So that's how I like to think about it, so that you keep it tight and clear. From your brand story, you're gonna have key messaging or content pillars. You can call it whatever you want. Content pillars is an easy way to think about it. Key messaging, like what are the key things that we want to consistently be known for in the marketplace? And the marketplace could be, what are the key messages that I want my podcast listeners to associate with my show? Why do they keep coming back to my show? It's these key things. That's why I think about that. And then because we're people first, we are gonna go into persona and then voice. And so persona goes back to who is this for? So if my key message is X, who is that key message for? Your persona might be the same persona. You could have one, or you could have multiple, which is why I'm saying this is not prescriptive. It is more illustrative of like apply it to your situation. And then you have the people first component of who is the right person to actually speak on this thing. A lot of times people start with, I want to start a podcast, and they don't actually do the work of understanding if the show supports the brand outcome, the brand story, the content pillars, who the show is for in terms of who they want listening and engaging. And then fourth, they're just like, oh, it should be my CEO. And then your CEO gets on the mic and like completely sucks. And you're like, he's not charismatic. He should not host the show. You see what I'm saying? So you have to think about people first in terms of like actual talent of the right voice to carry the message for. The other piece of that, just to kind of go back again on the logic here and the thinking, is when we talk about your point of view and like who you are and like the stories that you can tell and that kind of thing, knowing within your organization who is the right person to talk about this thing or facilitate, or whether they're a recurring guest or whatever, that is relevant for establishing credibility. Because the worst thing you can do, one of the worst things you can do is assign a talent to the show and they actually hurt your brand because they're boring or people just don't vibe. Like that's completely fine, but like it is your job to make sure that you're putting the right people on the mic. From once you've done that, then you can say yes to a podcast. That is what I believe. So I put media here. Yes, Ashley. So a couple ways to think about it. Well, you can definitely do a casting call. Like we've had several clients that do a fun little casting call for their organization and people raise their hand, because one of the truths about this is like if you don't want to do it, we know you don't want to do it. Like that shows up. Where energy is like what you get. So that's one thing I do is like try and do the casting call kind of vibes. That being said, if your brand initiative is to like build brand and part of that is I want my CEO to go on podcasts or get our name out there or whatever because they're the keeper of the story, you might decide how you do that. Meaning I'm going to make my CEO a thought leader who joins the show but doesn't host the show. You see what I mean? So you can kind of decide how you do that. One of the clients we work for has a lot of divisions within the company, and each division has like a VP, right? And they're like, I want that VP to be a thought leader. We will interview them and just like see how they are and be like, they're a recurring guest, or no, they've got the chops. It is an actual skill or talent rather, and then you can just help them create a better skill. So is that helpful? Cool. Okay, so once you've done all this, you can say yes to a podcast, and this is where the magic ultimately lies in helping you attract and amplify your right audience. And so that piece of media can be developed into multiple pieces of content. And I'm sure all of you have seen that before and understand that conceptually. Executing it is a little bit different, of course, but this is an easy or general way to think about it, is that media, that platform can be leveraged into audio, video, obviously, long form. You can leverage that into a web page. You can turn that into an article. You can turn that into a newsletter. And then you can take those long form pieces of content and chunk it down even further so that you have video clips, social copy, social graphics, like all the things that can come from one primary piece of content, which in purposes of our conversation is a podcast. And then you never have to worry, and because you followed the framework that I just talked you through, you never have to worry about your CEO calling you, or you as a CEO worried about the fact that we don't have consistent messaging across all of our channels. Because you can say, yes, we do, because we're anchored on our brand story. I developed content pillars for it. We have the right people speaking about it. We focused on the right audience when we developed it. So every content that we're leveraging and using AI in a wise way allows us to have confidence that our message is consistent across all the channels that we're amplifying it. So that is why this is created the way that I created it. Underneath that, you see the words host, guest, brand, internal teams. Those are just examples. But again, going back to this idea of people are what people buy, like today, people buy from people, not people buy people. People buy from people. And so we want people to activate your content on your behalf. And so the way that you can think about this is every person that touches the product becomes an activator for your content. So that can be the host, that can be the guest, that can be the brand voice, and then it can be internal teams or like ambassadors that help you spread the word. So when you're the number one way to, I started Share Your Genius in 2017. The number one way to grow a podcast in 2017 was by getting people who listen to podcasts to tell other people who listen to podcasts the podcast they listen to. Literally say that 10 times fast because I cannot. That is still the number one way to grow a podcast. Now, the word podcast has been a little bit more expansive, which is more like the shows I consume, the content I consume. Like, it is word of mouth. It is getting other people to share your stuff. And so this is a motion in which you're doing that on purpose. And so if you're saying yes to a podcast, you also want to, going back to our earlier slide about stay consistent, you want to get really clear on who's going to help you consistently get the message out into the marketplace. And that doesn't mean every episode you have to post about it, but it might mean every quarter. It might mean every other week, might mean every month. You just have to like decide how you're going to do that. One other example, just to kind of help bring this to life, is going back to this idea, and I think after that question you asked of like, how do you find the right person to talk? It might be multiple people that you want to speak on behalf of your company and your brand and your organization. And so you might actually stand up multiple shows or multiple episode styles where they can have come in as like thought partners to help with the content, et cetera. And if you do that as part of your strategy, you have multiple voices who can then amplify the content on a regular basis. And you can also, as part of that casting call like initiative, you can actually incentivize people within your organization to be creators on behalf of the organization. We have one client who incentivized with increased pay. Like each quarter, if they've been a part of X, they give it a bonus. There's all sorts of ways that you can do that because all of the stats are showing that brand engagement comes from people engaging with people. When back in the early 2010s, and I'm sure some of you can relate to this, it was all about the corporate voice. Corporate voice, corporate voice, corporate voice. And then it was like, let's make the corporate voice a little more like human, like cool, like all that kind of stuff. It is now like, who cares about the corporate voice? And it's the people behind the brand that is your actual differentiator in the world today. And so saying yes to a podcast allows you to basically take your differentiator, your best assets, which are your people, get them out there creating video and audio and content, and then amplifying it like crazy. Because to your point, and you don't even mean to do this, but to your point, like if you want, like people like you will follow your content. And so it's like, you're assuming that you're the persona, well, the persona that is you will find you if you're creating consistently with the message that you're consistently creating. And so that's the idea, is just how do we help brands take their people, put it into a formula where they have trust around the messaging at the brand level, and then give them content to get out into their channels. And so that's what that is. And then all of that content is getting disseminated and distributed across owned channels, and owned channels being both the brand owned channels like email, web, et cetera, but then the person's owned channels, which is like their personal LinkedIn, their TikToks, their Instagram, that kind of thing. I just had a lot of things. Anything there that anyone wants to react to or ask questions on, or does that all make sense theoretically? Cool, thank you. All right, keep on keeping on. So this is how I have broken down the channels today where you can be thinking about content distribution. I circled 3 because those are the 3 that I'm going to talk more about. There are other channels beyond this. Let me be very clear. There are discussion forums, Reddit, GitHub, like Discord, like there's a whole bunch of other stuff out there. So if that's relevant for your brand, that should be part of how you're thinking about content distribution. I just pulled out the tried and true that we all kind of know. The other thing that I've found a lot of people do is that just kind of like they say, I'm starting a podcast, but they don't have all the upfront work done. They also just automatically decide where they're distributing without getting really clear on like why we're distributing there, or they try and do like peanut butter spread and take that same content and just spread it across all the channels without treating it different. Well, if you don't do that, which Deb, is that your name? You're my favorite person in the world. Like with Deb over there, like shaking her head and things like that, like that is a bad thing to do because the algorithm hates that. Every platform wants to feel special. And so you have to treat each asset you create as special for that platform. So creating native assets from your long form. Yes. I mean, honestly, it's crazy. Yes. I do think there's like behavioral analysis that we can look at per like generation, like where are people consuming content. I don't know all the stats off the top of my head. But the thing I would say is like going back to that earlier slide of like, find out where they're spending their time. Like where are they exactly. Yeah. So if they are consuming content on TikTok, then it's like, what on TikTok are they consuming? And where the rubber meets the road, and the thing that's really challenging is like, maybe people are consuming like dumb content. You know what I mean? That your brand is never going to create and should not create. You know what I'm saying? Yes. And so then just cut that from your thing, because that's why we anchor on brand story and like what your company is trying to do. So if you're trying to build brand, you would not invest in a channel that potentially erodes the trust that you have. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Yeah. You don't always have to follow where they go. You just want to know where they are going so you can decide what to do. The other thing that I think is really important, and again, I don't know where you're all at in your stages of podcast planning, but are y'all familiar with the term a show flow? Yes, no, maybe. So theoretically speaking, not theoretically speaking, a show flow, the way that I define it, is it's your episode roadmap. And it's your episode roadmap for the facilitators, like the host, so they know like where to take people in terms of creative guardrails. It's also your roadmap for your editing team. And so one of the things that you can do that is a good way of speeding up and increasing efficiency is actually designing your show flow and then pre-identifying your theory of victory of like what segments, what questions, what buckets you already know you want to leverage as native for a different channel. So your long form is the thing that goes onto the podcast platform. You see what I'm saying? But you could say every episode when I ask this question of like, what was the thing that your report card said when you were in high school? That becomes our Instagram reel every single time. So then your production team would actually design your Instagram for that segment, and they already know to grab it. So there's less of the creative feedback loop so that you can execute faster. So designing your show with distribution in mind is like almost, I would say it's the number 2 that I would make sure that you're doing when you think about the amplification and opportunity to grow your show. So number 1 would be anchoring on strategy of like, why the heck am I doing this? Who are the right voices? Who am I? You know, the existential crisis questions. And then going into, I am designing my show with distribution in mind. Otherwise, it will become, I forget, Field of Dreams, it's been a minute. Otherwise, it will be like the place that you built that nobody actually does come. So with that in mind, the other thing I would say, and then we'll get into more of these details, is other thing that I see people fall down on is that they try and maximize for every channel instead of doing one really well first and then scaling. And I'm extremely impatient. Most of our clients are impatient because they're doing this because they're trying to see results, which is why we have to get clear on, is it demand or brand right now? What is the biggest priority for your company? But it's doing a really good job at figuring out like what your audience likes on LinkedIn. How are we using this? Are we getting the engagement really like? Are we getting the consumption metrics we want to see? Doing all of those things before you start adding and adding and adding. So that would just be one thing I would say is like prioritize the channel for distribution, design with the other ones in mind, but make sure you're measuring it and looking at it at a way that allows you to understand when you're ready to take on the next hurdle, if you will. Any questions or comments there before we keep on keeping on? Great. Okay. This is why I love Deb. Okay. All right. So I took the 3 and I just broke down kind of a roadmap for you that you could honestly copy paste for yourself. And you could delete pieces of it if it's not relevant. But we typically are working with brands that are in the B2B space. The other reason that I specify focusing on LinkedIn is because we're even seeing this on the macro scale when we're talking about like celebrities and things like that. But everyone who's won the Instagram game is now trying to figure out what channel they need to win next, and it's going to be LinkedIn. And the latest stats are like less than 2% of people who create and post on LinkedIn do it more than once a quarter. It's insane. You would not think that, but it's crazy. And so when you think about like, what are the channels that I want to be using to get my brand out there more and get people to know about us, LinkedIn is ripe for opportunity. And people are there typically because they're thinking about things from a professional setting perspective. Like, how do I move my career forward? How do I find a solution that I'm looking for that helps me in my job, that kind of thing. And so that's why I call that out. But this is where you can use your show to ultimately build authority, which is going back to that credibility place. You're driving demand because you're showcasing expertise. Like I have multiple, and I'm not like a massive creator. I try and post once a day on LinkedIn, Monday through Friday. So not like even all the time. And I have people go into my DMs, just be like, that post helped me, can we talk? That post helped me, can we talk? So all I'm doing is showing up consistently with the same message over and over and over again. And so that's the idea here. And then the kind of content that you could share is obviously like the talking head vibes with the clips and the captions, things like that. Those point of view carousel style images, and the carousel images that we're seeing work really well right now are less graphic based. And by graphic based, I mean this is graphic based, but more image based. So like lifestyle, like you at home or you at a team meeting, like, so using the carousel as image-based content, but that's supporting your point of view. So that's what I mean by that. And then obviously you can tag your guests. You can tag people that you think would like to listen to that episode. And then you're equipping your guests with content to share as well, which is what I showed you in the slide before of like giving them content to put out there. And then behind the scenes stuff. And so behind the scenes could literally be behind the scenes of creating the content, but I also think of behind the scenes of like, we had a client who just went to Africa, and I was like, we should talk about that on LinkedIn, and we don't have to talk about your, dark night of the soul moment, but we could talk about like the things that help to change your perspective and how you're showing up differently as a result. Like people are hungry for the authentic content, and unfortunately or fortunately, however you define that, authenticity typically equals vulnerability, meaning like sharing things, don't like, and I don't know if you guys see this on Instagram, but there's like an unhinged LinkedIn thing on Instagram. Don't become unhinged, but definitely feel like this is a place where you can kind of give people a little insight into who you are, how you think, how you got there. So, and then the world around you, right? Like we're all dealing with kids and camps and summer woes. So those are just the things to be thinking about when you're creating for LinkedIn. And then finally, like what's the business impact in leveraging LinkedIn? One is LinkedIn is prioritizing content that's actually driving relevance, meaning like if this post gets a ton of engagement, it's going to keep showing up in my algorithm. And so the more depth you can put into your content, leveraging your show to do that, they're going to plus that, they're going to support that, the algorithm will. And then I have found that it is the strongest conversion channel for brands who are looking to leverage their content for pipeline, because you're literally in front of your buyer, showing them who you are, what you care about, what you value. So that's the idea there. That's my quick thing on LinkedIn. Let's talk about the YouTube of it all. So the challenge with LinkedIn is that if I love Deb, which I've already publicly declared, if I love Deb and I go on LinkedIn and I love all the content she's posting, if I go look at her profile, I don't get a brand experience of Deb. I get her resume, I maybe get some other posts that she did, but I have to mine through it. It's a very like ungood, I don't know if that's the word, not good brand experience of Deb. If I want to learn about her more and binge her content and like kind of just like have fun, I want to go to YouTube, because on YouTube I can create playlists and I can create shorts and long form and all types of content that actually give brands a brand experience that they can get their audience to pay attention to. Now you can have your website do that as well, like it's an and situation, but I would definitely leverage YouTube as a platform play for people to get a brand experience for your brand. And then obviously YouTube is massive for discoverability. With our clients, we're seeing YouTube Shorts be the primary driver for people discovering their podcast. So YouTube Shorts is just like a crazy, I don't know how it works, to be honest with you. But that is what I would use YouTube for, is discoverability, brand experience, and then deeper dives. So when I'm saying deeper dives, I'm talking like more middle of the funnel content. So like the things that help people go from, I know you, I like you, I trust you, to I might be buying from you. So the longer form content that's like, this is our product, or this is what a customer said, or whatever. Now, if that doesn't, you can apply that from a personal level to a brand level, however you see it. But the idea is that YouTube gives you more of that middle of the funnel opportunity to create more content that might not come from your podcast as your top of funnel play. That is very markety speak. I want to make sure that that is resonating. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, good. Okay, content to share from your podcast. So again, going back to that graphic of like media turns into all this other stuff. If you're going to leverage YouTube, which I'd highly recommend, obviously your full-length video can go on there, and your full-length video doesn't have to be video the whole time. So it could literally just be your MP3 turned into an MP4 with like a graphic. That's completely fine. You just want to leverage the platform for the discoverability. And then you can actually curate moments from the long form that are like standalone clips as well. So one of our clients, she is a designer, and she's very, very well known, and she has a founder point of view that nobody ever gets to hear or really experience. So what we're doing is we're taking her long form interview that she has with like guests and things like that, and then anytime she gets to share her founder point of view, we're pulling that out as like a 5 to 10 minute clip that is its own vignette, even though we're pulling it from the long form. So when you go to her YouTube, you think she's creating so much content all the time, and it's just like, we're just using it. You know what I mean? Like we're using one, recording it and turning it into a whole bunch of other stuff. Feeds the beast in terms of YouTube, and it gets her founder point of view out into the marketplace. Well, yes, both. And when I say scripted, I mean prompted. So it would be like, hey, make sure you ask this question. Do you know what I'm saying? And then if we don't get it, you can mine for it later. They can be like, and actually, let me give you this example, because this is an easy thing to do for anybody. Is if you have a guest on your show and you're like, I want my guest to share my show, because you all should want that to happen. At the very end of your recording, I would actually just ask my guest, I would say, hey, we had an awesome conversation. What's like one thing you hope the audience takes away that you shared today? Have them like give you your answer, and you go, great, that's the clip that I'm going to create for you. So I know you've already endorsed it because you love that little piece. And then it creates that opportunity to then like empower them to want to share it, because they're not like, why did they use that as my clip? You know what I'm saying? Like sometimes that is what happens. So you can actually curate it, and the guest-led is a really concrete example, but for the founder-led, it works the same way. Of just like, Rebecca, you said this thing. Can you come back to it? Because it was really good. I just want you to say it again, like real quick. And then she'll do that, and then we'll be like, that becomes part of the clip, not the other. And then obviously YouTube Shorts, hooks, captions, the whole thing, and then keyword optimized descriptions, et cetera, et cetera. Thumbnails are really important on YouTube. So just making sure that the graphic presentation of the episode, whether it's a short, you can't really do thumbnails with shorts, but you can. But anyways, whether it's a long form or a short form, you just want it to look really nice. And it doesn't have to look the same as it is on the podcast platform. So you can actually treat YouTube differently, even though you're using a long form. Bare minimum, think of YouTube as your platform brand experience, where people can consume and engage more, leverage it for discoverability, but don't feel like you have to create a visual first show to leverage the opportunity. That is a different budget. You know what I'm saying? Like the video work that like Daniel does is different than somebody just creating an interview-based podcast that they're leveraging for LinkedIn or for YouTube. So that's why you have to think about these things when you're making decisions along the way. Yeah, go ahead. Yep. So does that make sense? So, okay, so on YouTube, what you do is, like most people are the primary driver that people are finding new podcasts today right now is YouTube. And it's through YouTube Shorts. So you take a YouTube short that's from the long form, and you link it to the full episode. And so you're consuming the short, and then it goes, oh, this will take me right to actually consuming the full podcast. And you do have to add it, but you should do that. Nope. you have to actually manually go, you have to actually set it up to do it. Yeah, we can show you how to do that. But like they have a process for how they do it on my team, but you do have to like actually do it. But it's very easy. It's just a step. That is the thing with podcasts, which is why I'm like prioritize one channel and scale, because there are so many moving parts and you could do it all and that's awesome. Or you could just do a few things very, very well. It just depends on, again, that's why I always anchor everything back on what is the goal. Is it demand right now? Is it brand? Like, what are we actually doing so that the tactics support the strategy, as opposed to the tactics driving the strategy where you're like, that's not actually what I wanted to have happen. I don't know. I don't have anything fresh that compares the two. You know what I'm saying? Like versus the other. If you want to take a to-do of like looking into that, not Edison Partners. Oh my gosh, Tom Webster. Sounds profitable. They have the best research on listener and like consumer behavior as it relates to podcasts. I can just tell you from our client perspective, like the majority of their net new listeners are coming from YouTube Shorts, where they are like they like the bite that they heard, that they want to now listen to the full thing. Yeah. Okay. YouTube is a whole other thing, but do you guys have any other questions related to it? Because it is just to give you some context too, again, going back to when Share Your Genius was started, it was like 97% of all listeners of podcasts were listening to podcasts on Apple Podcasts. It's like 30% now between YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. And Apple's investing a lot right now into it, so is Spotify, so it's kind of continuing to just like see what happens. But just to give you an idea of like what consumer behavior has done over the last 8-9 years, don't sleep on YouTube, is my point. Okay, Instagram. So does everyone know that now Instagram is being indexed by Google? Does everyone know that? It's like a thing now. So that means that when I Google things and I post about it on Instagram, it will pull up as a searchable thing that I find outside of the app. It's not a thing, it is now a thing. And so what that means is just making sure that you are, again, intentional with the naming of your clips, the captions that you're using, the titles, all of that kind of stuff. So this is the way I think about Instagram, is like shareable, it's indexed, it helps you grow reach by leveraging the tactics within the platform itself. Do not use it just because you can. Use it if you want to, because you will use it the way that it can be used. Does that make sense? Like, pick the one where your audience already is the most engaged and double down on that, because there's so many intricacies per platform. So that's my whole point. Otherwise, it's extremely overwhelming extremely quickly. Instagram? I don't know. This happened like 2.5 weeks ago or a week and a half ago. So TBD. I would just say, like, the way I'm thinking about it from a content perspective is like, I need to make sure that I understand what people want to be found for, so that everything that we create, we are like in the production, in the editing room, we're pulling out clips that speak on the things that they want to be found for. That's the way that I'm thinking more and more about it, which is why cataloging and understanding what people are searching for, what they're triggered by in terms of like what they care about, et cetera. I don't mean that necessarily negatively, is what I am creating content for. And then again, this is just like things that you can obviously do, content to share. I kind of try to put more in here of just like, I think of Instagram, I know the algorithms are different, I know they need to be treated, but you can leverage Instagram to kind of speak to different platforms as well. The key there though is just like, if you're gonna leverage TikTok and Instagram, the primary thing that you don't wanna do is don't keep that TikTok watermark on the Instagram thing, because Instagram will not prioritize it. Yeah, they don't care. They don't want you touting another brand on their channel. So that's just the way to think about that. The other key thing is like, what time is it? Oh man, okay, all right, there's so much here. So I will not wax poetic on this anymore. So that is Instagram. I'm not gonna do this, the how you know it's working, because that is, we can talk about it later. Let me just give you some quick plays for like actually growing your show. Once you've said yes, you've done the strategy, you're getting it out the door, you're leveraging the channels, amazing. These are plays that you can run that are always going to be relevant. So number one is like content release. You can find a guru who tells you that you have to launch with a minimum 4 episodes or 3 episodes or 5. It doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter. I just recommend you launch with 3 if you can, because it gives your audience an opportunity to sample your content. And it also gives you more content to launch with. That being said, I prioritize sustainability over everything. So if you only have 4 episodes in the bank, or you're doing a monthly show or whatever, don't do that. You should launch with what makes sense for your brand and your circumstance based on the strategy that you have. But the idea here is that regardless of if you launch with 1 or 17, don't launch with 17, but if you launch with like 1 or 3 or 5 or whatever the number is, the idea to get more eyes on your content is to equip other people to share it. So giving people launch kits. You can do like a VIP strategy where you're like, these 10 people are going to help me launch my show, just like you do with launching a book or going to an event. It's the same principles. You just want to package it up and make it really easy for people. So that is the ambassadors piece of this pillar, is just like, who are the people that will share my stuff when we go to launch? Because that's your opportunity to get out there. The other thing I always say is like, your launch strategy doesn't have to be when you actually launch your show. So like, you could let your show live for like a month out into the world. You could just get some feelers out there, maybe do some grassroots stuff of like, get your friends and family to do some reviews and that kind of thing, and then do a marketing launch of it 30 days from then, or 60 days from then, whenever it makes sense for you to get the maximum impact out of that launch. So you don't need to think about it as like once and done. With our clients, we do like a soft launch, we do a mid launch, we do like all sorts of things to just kind of help them get the biggest oomph out of it. And then cross promotional is a really huge opportunity, because it goes back to what I said earlier that I can't say 10 times fast. Going on other podcasts where your audience is, but that show doesn't compete with that company. That's a really easy way. And people are very willing to do a like quid pro quo of like, you come on my show, I'll have you on my show, and then share each other's stuff. So everyone is wanting people to pay attention to the content they're creating. So that's a fairly easy thing to do and an easy thing to secure. You just have to, again, think about it under the guise of my brand, and is this in line with my brand? So that's kind of like 3 best practices around launching your show well. Release the content, do cross promo, get other people to share your show with a call to action for helping drive reviews. Reviews doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be like top show or whatever, but it just does give social proof that this is something worth listening to. Any questions or thoughts on that before I fly? Okay, flying. Ongoing strategy. So this would be something that I would just say like you're constantly wanting to do, but organic is the best audience, because those are people who have found you and love you and will continue to come back to you. So you just want to make sure that you're constantly showing up consistently, you're staying top of mind, and that you can be found on the platforms that people listen to podcasts on. And I think about a show as a creative evolution, which means like what you start with shouldn't be what you stay with. Like you should be constantly getting feedback. You should be constantly looking at what's been enhanced in the platforms and things like that so that you can maximize the opportunity. And then strategic guests. So I talked about this earlier. Word of mouth marketing is the number one way. Strategic guest doesn't mean guest with the biggest audience. It just means guest with the best trust, the most amount of trust with your audience. So, for example, like if I have a CEO that is liked and loved by 150 people that I want to be in front of, that's going to be way better for me than getting like who's somebody famous? I don't know, getting someone famous on the show. We've actually found that clients who have had famous people on, those episodes don't necessarily perform better. A, the celebrity isn't sharing that they went on the podcast, and B, they might not have any credibility in the space in which they're speaking on. So credibility trumps celebrity, unless the celebrity is your target audience. And then paid. I would not do paid media for your show until it has lived for at least 6 months. And people don't like that, but I'm telling you, you should do that, because you want to see how much organic you can get on your own. You want to make sure that you've worked out some of the kinks that you have before you put some paid media behind it. There's lots of tools you can use. Podroll is one that we use. We also use an ad network that allows you to target specifically on LinkedIn, or you can use Google Display. All sorts of things that you can use. YouTube, we have had clients that use YouTube for ads. Like, there's no right or wrong. It again goes back to like, what channel are people currently engaging on, what channel are you trying to grow, that kind of thing. But paid is definitely something I would recommend, but not until your show has lived long enough to earn it. I just flew through all this stuff. The last kind of slide I had here was this, is just like practical ways to grow your audience. Why do they plateau versus what are ones that support sustainable growth? So I just put that here. I'm happy to share this deck with you guys so you can have it. Any final questions or thoughts before we call this one done? Yeah. We have two primary models. One is DIY, you do it yourself, but we guide you. So we do that in a very cost-effective way. We just give you homework, we check your homework, give you feedback, and then we also do all of the heavy lifting of the production on the back end. The other is we do it for you, and that's like we ask you a lot of questions and present back to you. So those are the two primary ways, but we are full service end to end, and we just we cater our approach based on how much you guys are doing versus how much we're doing, and we are priced under market because I think that this type of content is what creates human connection, and I want it to be affordable for people to do. So I believe very much in the power of creating a podcast, like, and what it can do for your brand. So hopefully this is helpful. Any other questions or whatever? Here's the caveat of everything. These are the rules, not the exceptions. So I would say Alex Cooper, like from Color Daddy, Joe Rogan Experience, like you're going to have people who are the exception. But I would say he breaks that rule, but I mean, literally, like part of his thing is just like creating content. Like he's going to ask questions and ask them to anyone that we're all paying attention to. So like, I would say he does have a premise. I just don't know like it off the top of my head. I mean, if you look at Alex Cooper's, like her tagline, it's like the #1 podcast for women. That doesn't tell you anything. You see what I'm saying? So no idea. So that's my whole point, is like everything I'm giving you today is what I have learned by working with brands and showing them how to run a successful program, leveraging a podcast as part of their marketing ecosystem. Going to become famous off of a podcast, my advice probably applies, but but maybe not exactly. Do you see what I'm saying? He also started it before everyone was doing it, you know what I mean? And so he got his following and kept them. He also has the, what's the word when things are surprising? He has that factor, like thank you. Yes, like he has that going for him. Like he has people smoking weed on his show. Like that is just like, it's provocative. It's the things that make you pause, not because you necessarily agree, but it's because you're like, can't stop looking. It's like a car wreck, you know what I mean? So I don't know if that's helpful, but yeah. Was this helpful? This is amazing. Cool, yay. Thank you all.